I stood when my lawyer touched my elbow. "Mrs. Hale," she whispered, "just take one step forward." One step felt like a mile. The courtroom smelled like polish and cold air. Wood. Power. I felt every eye on my back as I moved. My hand rested on my stomach without thinking. The baby shifted, slow and heavy, like it already knew something was wrong. Behind me, I heard Richard laugh. Not loud, just enough. "Your Honor," his lawyer said smoothly, "we're ready to proceed." Richard leaned back in his chair. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ceiling, at the flags, at anything except the woman he'd married, the woman carrying his child. I took another step. That's when it happened. Pain exploded up my leg. I gasped. My knee buckled. I grabbed the table to keep from falling. Someone in the gallery said, "Oh my God." I turned my head slowly. Richard's shoe was already pulling back. He finally looked at me then, and he smiled. "Did you just—" my lawyer started. "I didn't do anything," Richard said calmly. "She tripped." I couldn't breathe. The baby kicked hard, like a panic signal. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "Order!" Richard's mother laughed. A soft, amused sound. "She's always been dramatic." My lawyer snapped, "Your Honor, he kicked her." Richard shrugged. "Prove it." I whispered, "You kicked me." He leaned forward just enough for me to hear. "You should have stayed quiet." My hands were shaking. I hated that he could see it. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, are you injured?" My voice cracked. I swallowed. "I'm pregnant." Richard sighed loudly. "Here we go." "That's enough," the judge said. Richard leaned back again, completely relaxed. Like this was just another meeting he owned. The bailiff shifted, unsure. My lawyer whispered, "Do you want to recess?" "No," I said too fast. "No, I'm fine." I wasn't. But if I sat down now, I knew I'd never stand again. Richard's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is clearly a distraction tactic." I stared at him. He hurt me. He smiled politely. "Mrs. Hale, no one saw anything." I looked around. Some people avoided my eyes. Others looked curious, entertained. One woman shook her head like she was tired of me already. The judge studied Richard. "Mr. Hale, did you make contact with your wife?" Richard met his gaze. Calm, confident. "No, sir." The silence that followed felt heavy, dangerous. "Very well," the judge said. "Proceed." That was it. No apology, no warning, no consequence. Richard glanced back at me and mouthed, "Told you." I lowered myself into the chair. My leg throbbed, my stomach tightened. Fear crawled up my spine, slow and cold. My lawyer leaned in. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "He thinks he's untouchable." She nodded. "Most men like him do." Richard's fixer took notes at the defense table, calm as stone. His senior attorney adjusted his cufflinks, like this was boring him. The judge called the case to order again. Opening statements. Richard stood as his lawyer spoke for him. Tall, perfect suit, billionaire confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer said, "this case is about a woman seeking attention and leverage." Richard didn't even look at me. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not fear, resolve. I placed my hand over my stomach and whispered so quietly, only I could hear, "I won't let him win." The judge's gavel came down, and I knew this was only the beginning. They didn't look at my leg. They didn't ask about the baby. They looked at Richard. That was the truth I learned when the courtroom settled back into its seats. Power has gravity. It pulls belief toward it. Richard sat there like a man carved from money and confidence, and the room bent around him without realizing it. "Mrs. Hale," Richard's lawyer said, standing again. We'd like to begin by addressing the pattern of behavior in this case. Pattern. I hated that word. He paced slowly, hands relaxed. A pattern of exaggeration, emotional instability, attention-seeking. I felt heat rush to my face. That's not true. He smiled at me like I was a child interrupting adults. You'll have your turn. Richard leaned toward his mother and whispered something. She smirked. The lawyer continued. My client has been subjected to repeated public scenes, emotional displays, dramatic accusations. I whispered to my lawyer. He kicked me. She whispered back, I know, stay steady. Richard's lawyer gestured toward me. Notice her posture, her breathing. This is not a woman in danger. This is a woman performing. Objection, my lawyer said. Speculation. Overruled, the judge replied calmly. It felt like being slapped again. Richard finally looked at me, his eyes cold and amused. He mouthed, See? I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, we ask that the court recognize this pattern before it clouds the facts. Facts. I wanted to stand up and scream facts. I wanted to list every locked door, every threat. Every night I cried quietly so the staff wouldn't hear. But facts don't sound real when they come from someone without power. Richard's fixer was called next. He walked to the stand like he owned the floor. Perfect posture, perfect tie. State your name and roll, the lawyer said. Daniel Cross, he answered smoothly, family legal advisor to Mr. Hale. Were you present during the marriage? Yes. Did you ever witness abuse? No. I laughed without meaning to. The room turned toward me. I'm sorry, I said quickly. No. Richard's lawyer raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Hale, please control yourself. Daniel Cross glanced at me with something close to pity. Mr. Hale was always respectful. I whispered, You weren't there at night. He ignored me. Richard's lawyer asked, Did Mrs. Hale ever threaten legal action before this divorce? Yes, Cross said. Often. During arguments. I felt the air leave my lungs. That's not, I started. Mrs. Hale, the judge warned gently. I swallowed. Richard leaned back, arms crossed, satisfied. Cross continued. She frequently spoke about taking everything. My lawyer stood. Objection. Context. Overruled. I felt my hands shaking again. My lawyer leaned close. Breathe. Richard's lawyer smiled at the jury box. You see, Your Honor, this is not abuse. This is leverage. I looked around. Some people nodded. One man scribbled notes. No one defended me. The judge took it all in silently. His face gave nothing away. Richard stood when his lawyer finished. He didn't need to speak, but he wanted to. Your Honor, he said smoothly, I loved my wife. I still do. But she's angry, and anger makes people reckless. I whispered, You hurt me. He didn't look at me. She wants to punish me for leaving. I felt something crack inside my chest. The judge said, Mrs. Hale, you'll have your opportunity to testify. When Richard sat down, he finally glanced at me again. This time, there was no smile, just a warning. I realized then that this court wasn't deciding who was right. It was deciding who was believable. And right now, belief belonged to him. I rested my hand on my stomach, feeling the baby shift again. I whispered to myself, They believe him now. Then quietly, with something dark and steady growing inside me, I thought, when they called my name, my legs almost didn't move. Mrs. Hale, the clerk said again. I stood slowly. The room felt farther away now, like I was underwater. Every sound was dull, except my heartbeat. My lawyer touched my arm. You're ready. I didn't feel ready. I felt exposed. I walked to the witness stand and sat. The chair was hard, cold. I placed my hand on my stomach again. The baby was quiet now. Too quiet. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do," I said. Richard watched me like he was waiting for a show. My lawyer stood. "Julia, can you tell the court how your marriage began?" I took a breath. "It began quietly." Richard scoffed. "That's not an answer." The judge glanced at him. "You'll remain silent." I nodded and continued. "He was charming. Everyone said I was lucky." "Lucky?" my lawyer repeated gently. "Yes," I said. "That's what they called it." She asked, "And when did things change?" I hesitated. Richard leaned forward. "Take your time." I looked at him. "When I stopped agreeing." The room shifted. I continued. "When I asked questions. When I wanted access to accounts. When I said no." Richard's lawyer stood. "Objection. Vague." The judge said, "Overruled. Continue." I swallowed. "He didn't hit me. Not at first." Richard smiled faintly. "He corrected me," I said. "He controlled what I wore, who I spoke to, how long I stayed out." "Because I worried," Richard said. "That's called marriage." I looked at him. "You locked me out of my own home." "That's a lie," he snapped. My lawyer stepped in. "Julia, what happened when you became pregnant?" The word pregnant hung in the air. Richard shifted in his seat. "I thought it would change things," I said quietly. "I thought he'd soften." "And did he?" "No." Richard's lawyer stood again. "Mrs. Hale, are you saying my client abused you?" I met his eyes. "Yes?" He smiled. "Then why didn't you leave?" The question hit like a punch. I felt the room lean in. "Answer," Richard said softly. I looked down at my hands, then back up, because I was scared. The lawyer laughed lightly. "Of what?" "Of him." Richard shook his head. "Unbelievable." The lawyer paced. "You're educated, wealthy, surrounded by staff, and yet you claim fear?" "Yes. Yet there are photos of you smiling, traveling, shopping." "Because fear doesn't photograph well," I said. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it true you threatened divorce repeatedly?" "I asked for help," I said. "And demanded money?" "I asked for safety." Richard leaned toward his lawyer. "She's twisting it." The judge raised a hand. "Enough." The lawyer pressed on. "Mrs. Hale, did you ever say you would ruin my client?" I closed my eyes for a second. "I said I would tell the truth." "That's not what you said," he replied. I looked at Richard. "You told me no one would believe me." He shrugged. I was right. My lawyer stood quickly. "Objection." "Sustained," the judge said sharply. Silence fell. My lawyer asked, "Julia, why are you testifying today?" I answered without thinking. "Because my child deserves better." Richard laughed under his breath. "Using the baby now." I snapped my head toward him. "You kicked me!" The courtroom froze. The judge said slowly, "Mr. Hale." Richard raised his hands. "She's emotional." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the stand. "You kicked me because you thought you could." My voice shook, but I didn't stop. "You thought no one would stop you." The judge studied me closely. I felt it then. A shift, small, but real. My lawyer said softly, "No further questions." As I stepped down, Richard whispered, "You're digging your own grave." I met his eyes. "No." Then I sat back down, heart racing, knowing I had finally said it out loud, and knowing the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was waiting. I didn't get to rest long. "Cross-examination," Richard's lawyer said, already standing. Of course. He approached the stand slowly, like he had all the time in the world, like my words were already fading. Mrs. Hale, he began, you want this court to believe you lived in fear. Yes. Yet you never called the police. No. You never went to a hospital. No. You never told a judge, a counselor, a reporter. I said nothing. He smiled. Because none of it happened. That's not true, I said. He tilted his head. Then explain the silence. I felt the weight of the room press down on me. I looked at the judge, then back at the lawyer. Silence was how I survived. Richard laughed once, sharp. You survived just fine. The lawyer circled. Let's talk about money. You had access to credit cards. Until they were canceled. No proof. I had access to staff. Who answered to my client? You lived in luxury. I lived in a cage. He stopped walking. That's dramatic language. It's accurate. Richard leaned forward. You loved the life. I turned toward him. I loved who you pretended to be. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer snapped, Mrs. Hale, focus on the question. He flipped a page. You claim my client threatened you. What did he say exactly? I hesitated. Richard's eyes locked onto mine. Answer, the lawyer pressed. He said, I began slowly, that if I ever spoke, he would take everything. My child, my name, my credibility. Richard shook his head. Never said that. You said it in the kitchen, I replied, when the cameras were off. The lawyer scoffed. Convenient, I swallowed. That's how threats work. He raised his voice slightly. So there are no recordings, no witnesses, no reports. No, I said. Just me. He spread his hands. Your Honor, this is belief, not evidence. I felt my chest tighten. Then the judge spoke. Continue. The lawyer nodded. Mrs. Hale, isn't it true you signed multiple agreements confirming your satisfaction with the marriage? Yes, I said, under oath. Yes. So, were you lying then? He asked. Or are you lying now? The question hung in the air like a trap. I took a breath. I was lying then. Richard smirked. There it is. The lawyer smiled. So the court should trust a proven liar? I looked straight ahead. The court should understand why women lie to stay alive. Silence. Even Richard stopped moving. The judge leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving me. The lawyer recovered. Mrs. Hale, do you consider yourself a victim? Yes. Despite your wealth? Yes. Despite your education? Yes. Despite marrying one of the most powerful men in the state? Yes. He sighed. No further questions. I stayed seated for a second, my hands gripping the edge of the stand. My lawyer stood quickly. Redirect, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Julia, she said softly. Why didn't you scream? I answered without hesitation. Because screaming makes men like him angrier. Richard snapped. That's enough. The judge looked at him sharply. Sit down. My lawyer asked, what made today different? I glanced at my leg, then my stomach. Because he did it in public. And why does that matter? Because he forgot to be careful. Richard stood halfway. This is ridiculous. The judge's voice cut through him. Mr. Hale, one more outburst and you'll be removed. Richard slowly sat, his jaw tight. My lawyer nodded. No further questions. As I stepped down, my knees felt weak. Richard leaned close as I passed. You think silence means truth? I whispered back. It means you're scared. For the first time, he didn't reply. I sat down and stared straight ahead. The room felt different now. Not friendly, not safe, but awake. And somewhere beneath the quiet, beneath the doubt and denial, I felt it. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It waited. And now, everyone could hear it breathing. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. Richard's lawyer stood again, straightening his jacket like this was just another round. Your Honor, the defense would like to address the court regarding conduct. Richard glanced at me, eyes sharp, calculating. The judge nodded once. Proceed. The lawyer said, this case is drifting into emotion. Accusations without proof. We ask the court to refocus on facts. Richard added casually, and stop indulging theatrics. My lawyer started to rise. Your Honor. The judge lifted a hand. Then he did something no one expected. He stood up. The sound of his chair scraping back was louder than the gavel. Conversations died mid-breath. Even Richard went still. The judge didn't speak right away. He looked around the courtroom, at the gallery, at the lawyers, at Richard. Then he looked at me. Not like a judge, like a man seeing something familiar. Mr. Hale, he said slowly, you've shown remarkable comfort in this room. Richard smiled. I respect the court. The judge tilted his head. Do you? Richard's smile faltered for half a second. Of course. The judge stepped forward, resting his hands on the bench. Because from where I'm standing, you've interrupted, mocked, and dismissed testimony. Richard shrugged. I'm defending myself. No, the judge replied. You're testing limits. The room was silent. Richard's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, with respect. The judge raised a finger. Sit down. The lawyer froze, then slowly sat. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. The judge continued. This court does not belong to wealth, or status, or confidence. Richard laughed once, nervously. Is this necessary? The judge's eyes hardened. Yes. Something in his voice changed, not louder, heavier. Mrs. Hale, he said, turning to me, how long have you been married? I answered carefully. 7 years. And during that time, he asked, did you ever feel you could speak freely? Richard snapped. Objection. The judge didn't look at him. Overruled. I swallowed. No. The judge nodded once, as if confirming something only he could see. Richard shifted in his chair. This is turning into a lecture. The judge straightened fully now. Mr. Hale, you seem uncomfortable. I'm impatient, Richard replied, with bias. The word hung there. The judge took a slow breath. You mistake firmness for bias. Richard leaned forward. I know my rights. The judge leaned forward too. So do I. The air felt tight, pressurized. The judge said, you kicked your wife in this courtroom. Richard scoffed. Allegedly. The judge's voice dropped. In front of witnesses. Richard's jaw clenched. She tripped. The judge stared at him for a long moment. That's your defense? Yes. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. He turned to the bailiff. Play the footage. Richard stiffened. What footage? My heart skipped. A screen lowered from the wall. The room shifted as the video began to play. Security footage. The angle was wide, grainy, silent. I saw myself walking forward. Then I saw Richard's foot move. Clear, intentional. The gasp from the gallery hit like a wave. Richard stood up. That's misleading. The judge's voice thundered. Sit down. Richard froze, then sat. The footage played again. Slower. There was no doubt. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from pain, but from relief. The judge turned to Richard. You forgot something today. Richard swallowed. And what's that? The judge said quietly, cameras don't care who you are. Richard looked around. For the first time, he looked unsure. The judge sat back down, but he didn't retreat. His presence filled the room. "We will take a brief recess," he said. 10 minutes. The gavel struck. As people stood, whispers exploded. Richard leaned toward me, his voice low and furious. "You planned this." I looked at him, my voice steady. "No," he hissed. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head. "I'm surviving it." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. As the judge exited through the side door, his gaze lingered on me for just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Something personal. And as the courtroom emptied, I realized the balance had shifted. Richard felt it too. Because for the first time since this trial began, he didn't look in control. He looked afraid. When we came back from recess, the courtroom felt smaller. Not physically, emotionally. People avoided my eyes now. Not because they didn't believe me, but because they did. Belief makes people uncomfortable when they realize they were wrong. Richard didn't sit like before. His leg bounced. His jaw stayed tight. He whispered to his lawyer. Too fast, too sharp. The judge returned last. Everyone stood. He paused before sitting down, his hands resting on the bench. He looked older somehow. He didn't call the room to order right away. Instead, he looked at me. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice steady. "I need to address something before we proceed." Richard scoffed quietly. "More theatrics?" The judge's eyes snapped to him. "You will remain silent." Richard shut his mouth. The judge inhaled slowly. I saw his chest rise, fall. "This court," he began, "is governed by rules, ethics, boundaries." My lawyer stiffened beside me. The judge continued. "Judges must avoid conflicts of interest, even the appearance of one." A ripple moved through the room. Richard frowned. "What is this?" The judge didn't look at him. "Mrs. Hale." My heart started to race. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. He swallowed. I saw it. "Do you recognize me beyond this courtroom?" The question hit me like a wave. My vision blurred. The room disappeared. I heard my own voice, distant. "Yes." Richard laughed sharply. "What is going on?" The judge closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. "For the record," he said, "my name is Thomas Grant." The name echoed. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. Gasps filled the courtroom. Richard's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I will finish," the judge said firmly. He looked at the room. "I am Julia Hale's father." The world stopped. Someone dropped a pen. Richard stood so fast his chair scraped loudly. "That's impossible." My chest felt tight. My hands trembled. The judge went on. "I was estranged from my daughter for years. By design. By circumstance." Richard stared at me. "You lied to me." I whispered. "You never asked." The judge raised his voice slightly. "Mr. Hale, sit down." Richard didn't move. The judge said sharply, "Now." Richard sat. The judge addressed the court. "I have recused myself from every case involving my daughter since taking this bench." Richard's lawyer snapped, "Then why is this happening now?" "Because," the judge replied, "I did not know she was the woman before me until today." Silence swallowed the room. My lawyer whispered, "Oh my God." The judge looked at me again, and for the first time, his voice broke. "You used your married name." I nodded. I didn't want protection. I wanted truth. Richard shook his head in disbelief. "This is a setup." The judge's gaze hardened. "This is a coincidence you created." Richard laughed wildly. You expect us to believe this? The judge leaned forward. I expect you to understand what happens next. Richard's lawyer said quickly, Your Honor, with respect, you cannot. I can, the judge interrupted. And I will. He turned to the clerk. For the record, I am formally acknowledging the relationship. Then to the courtroom. This does not end the case. It changes who hears it. Richard stood again. You can't do this. The judge's voice dropped. I am stepping down from the bench on this matter. A wave of noise erupted. But before I do, he continued, I am issuing immediate orders based on conduct observed. Richard froze. Mr. Hale, the judge said, you assaulted a pregnant woman in open court. Richard's face drained of color. I am referring this incident for criminal review, the judge said, effective immediately. Richard shouted, This is insane! The judge struck the gavel once. Hard. Remove him, he said. The bailiff stepped forward. Richard turned to me, eyes wide, voice shaking. You did this. I stood slowly. No, I said. You did. As Richard was escorted out, shouting, cursing, unraveling, the judge looked at me one last time. Not as a judge, as my father. I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner, he said quietly. Tears streamed down my face. You're here now. He nodded once. Then he stood, removed his robe, and walked out. And in that moment, Richard lost more than control. He lost the room. He lost the narrative. He lost the illusion that power could protect him from blood, truth, and consequence. And I knew this was no longer just a divorce. It was a reckoning. They brought Richard back in an hour later. Not the way he'd left. No swagger, no casual smile. His tie was loosened. His face was pale. Anger sat on him badly now, like a suit that didn't fit anymore. A new judge took the bench. Younger, sharper, unimpressed. This court is back in session, she said. Richard leaned toward his lawyer. This is a circus. I whispered to mine. He's scared. She nodded. Men like him don't know how to hide it. The new judge looked directly at Richard. Mr. Hale, your conduct earlier has consequences. Richard scoffed. This whole thing is compromised. The judge replied calmly. The footage is not. My heart beat faster. The prosecution was at it now, quiet, efficient. They didn't argue. They presented. A medical professional took the stand. Did you examine Mrs. Hale after the incident? The prosecutor asked. Yes. What did you observe? Bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. Richard snapped. She bruises easily. The judge said sharply, One more interruption. The doctor continued. Given her pregnancy, the risk was significant. I closed my eyes. Richard's lawyer stood. Doctor, could this injury be self-inflicted? The doctor didn't hesitate. No. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. The judge's eyes hardened. Sit down. Then came the footage again. This time, closer, enhanced. The sound was still missing, but the intent was unmistakable. The prosecutor paused it at the moment of impact. Is that your foot, Mr. Hale? She asked. Richard stared at the screen. I don't know. The judge raised an eyebrow. You don't know where your foot was? Laughter broke out in the gallery. Not cruel, disbelieving. Richard flushed. This is ridiculous. The prosecutor turned to me. Mrs. Hale, what did you feel in that moment? I swallowed. Fear. Why? Because I realized he didn't care who saw. Richard laughed once, hollow. You're enjoying this. I looked at him. I'm telling the truth. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Richard's lawyer stood, desperation creeping into his voice. My client has contributed millions to this community. The judge interrupted. We are not auctioning justice. Richard leaned forward. You can't ruin me over one mistake. The judge replied evenly. One act caught on camera, others implied by pattern. Richard shook his head. You don't understand power. The judge leaned forward. You don't understand accountability? Something snapped then. Richard stood. I built everything I have. I don't answer to people like her. The room went dead silent. I stood too. You're right, I said quietly. You don't answer to me. He sneered. Finally, I continued, you answer to the law. The judge struck the gavel. Enough. Richard's breathing was heavy now. He looked around like he was searching for allies. There were none. The judge said, This court finds probable cause for criminal assault. Richard's lawyer whispered urgently. The judge added, Mr. Hale, your demeanor today has confirmed what evidence suggested. Richard laughed again, but his eyes were wet. You think this ends me? The judge replied, No, your choices did. As they led Richard back to his seat, his shoulders sagged. I sat down slowly, my legs weak. The baby moved again, strong, steady. My lawyer leaned in. You did it. I shook my head. He did. The judge called for closing considerations. As the courtroom prepared for the final phase, I looked at Richard. He wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. His arrogance wasn't loud now. It was on trial, and it was losing. The courtroom was too quiet, not the calm kind. The kind that presses against your ears and makes every breath feel loud. I sat with my hands folded, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. Richard stood at the defense table, stiff and pale. The judge adjusted her papers. This court has reviewed the evidence, testimony, and conduct displayed throughout these proceedings. Richard's lawyer whispered, Stay calm. Richard muttered, I am calm. He wasn't. The judge looked directly at him. Mr. Hale, your behavior in this courtroom has spoken as loudly as any witness. Richard scoffed. Behavior isn't a crime. She replied evenly, Assault is. A ripple moved through the gallery. I felt my chest tighten. The judge continued, The court finds clear and convincing evidence of domestic abuse. Richard shook his head. This is unbelievable. The judge didn't react. Additionally, the court finds that Mr. Hale used financial control and intimidation as tools of coercion. I closed my eyes for a second. Richard's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, we object to... Sit down, the judge said. The lawyer sat. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Hale, please stand. My legs trembled as I rose. She said gently, This court recognizes the danger you and your unborn child were placed in. I swallowed hard. Richard laughed bitterly. You're taking her side. The judge looked at him coldly. I am taking the law's side. She read from the page. Effective immediately, Mr. Hale's assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. Richard stepped back like he'd been struck. You can't do that. I just did, the judge replied. Gasps echoed. The judge went on. Full legal custody is granted to Mrs. Hale. Supervised visitation only, subject to psychological evaluation. Richard shouted, That's my child! I turned toward him. You kicked us. The room fell silent. The judge said firmly, Security. The bailiff stepped closer. Richard's voice cracked. This is a mistake. The judge didn't slow down. Criminal charges for assault have been formally referred. Richard whispered, You're destroying me. She looked him straight in the eye. You destroyed yourself. My knees almost gave out. The judge concluded, "Mrs. Hale, you are granted protection effective immediately." She struck the gavel. The sound echoed, final. Richard stood frozen. Then his shoulders dropped. All the power drained out of him at once. He looked around, desperate. No one met his eyes. His lawyer avoided him. His mother stared at the floor. Richard looked at me last. "You won't survive without me." I met his gaze. "Watch me." The bailiff took his arm. Richard didn't resist this time. As he was led away, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. Not because a man had fallen, but because they realized how far he had climbed without consequence, until now. I sat back down slowly, my heart racing. My lawyer squeezed my hand. "It's over." I shook my head. "It's done." There was a difference. I felt tears slide down my face, not from sadness, from release. The judge looked at me once more. "Court is adjourned." People stood. Cameras flashed. Voices filled the room. But all I could hear was my own breathing. In, out, free. I rested my hand on my stomach. "We're safe," I whispered. The baby moved, strong and steady. Outside, reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Hale, was justice served?" I didn't answer. I stepped into the sunlight, blinking, feeling lighter than I had in years. Behind me, a billionaire's world lay in ruins. Ahead of me, a life waited. One I would build without fear, without silence, without him. And for the first time, I knew exactly who I was. Not his wife, not his victim, but the woman who stood up and won. Outside the courthouse, the noise hit me all at once. "Julia!" "Mrs. Hale, over here." "Do you feel safe now?" Cameras flashed so bright they made my eyes water. I stopped just past the steps and turned back once. The doors stood tall and closed, like they were guarding everything I'd left behind inside. My lawyer leaned close. "You don't have to say anything." I nodded. "I know." But then someone shouted, "Was it worth it?" I stopped walking. I turned slowly. "It cost him everything," the reporter pressed. "Was it worth destroying a man like that?" I felt my heartbeat steady instead of race. "I didn't destroy him," I said. "I survived him." The crowd went quiet. I placed my hand on my stomach. "And so did my child." No one asked another question. We walked to the car. My legs finally gave in once I sat down. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. My lawyer smiled. "That's normal." I wiped my face. "I don't feel normal." She said softly, "You feel free." Later, when the noise faded and the day turned quiet, I sat alone in the guest room of a friend's house. No penthouse, no staff, no cameras, just silence. Real silence. I stared at the wall for a long time, half expecting Richard's voice to break through it. "You'll regret this." It didn't come. My phone buzzed once. A message from my father. "I'm here whenever you're ready." I stared at it. Then I typed back, "Thank you for standing up." The reply came almost instantly. I should have done it sooner. Tears slipped down my face again, slower this time. That night, I spoke to my child for the first time out loud. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I stayed too long." The baby kicked gently, like an answer. I smiled through tears. "I promise you something." I rested both hands on my stomach. "You will never grow up thinking fear is love." Weeks passed. Richard's name filled headlines, not with praise, with words like investigation and charges and fall. People who once praised him avoided saying his name at all. And me? I walked freely. I slept without jumping at every sound. I laughed without checking who was watching. One afternoon, I ran into a woman outside a cafe. She stared at me for a second, then said quietly, "You're the one from court." I braced myself. She said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For standing up," she replied. "It helped me leave." I swallowed hard. "I'm glad." That night, I finally understood something. Justice isn't loud when it arrives. It doesn't cheer, it settles. Months later, I sat in a small courtroom again. This time, not afraid. Richard wasn't there. His chair was empty. The judge read final confirmations, custody permanent, protection extended. When it ended, the gavel sounded softer than I remembered. Outside, the sun felt warm. My father stood beside me, awkward, careful. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I am," he smiled. "You were brave." I looked at him. I learned it somewhere. We stood there for a moment, not needing to say more. As I walked away, I thought about the woman I had been on the first day of court. Quiet, shaking, humiliated. She felt like a stranger now. If you're watching this, and you've ever been told no one would believe you, remember this. Power hates witnesses. Truth doesn't need permission. And silence only protects the person who benefits from it. So tell me, did justice come too late or right on time? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want more stories where the underestimated stand up and win, subscribe and stay.